Good morning and welcome to a wild, windy Wednesday. I just got back in the door from a little bit of Aldi shopping and a little bit of a sleep checkup to make sure I'm sleeping well. Anyway, I'm Annie Meehan with AM Speaking and Consulting. I'm an international keynote speaker. I have authored 10 books and I do coaching and consulting to help people with confidence and communication. But I come to you every week on H3 TV to remind you that there is always hope, even in the hard. And I love to interview people that want to share their story of how they've overcome challenges, changes, disruptions in their life. And so I'm super excited to have Lydia with us today. So please welcome her to the stage. Hi.
Hi. Hi, Annie. Yeah. Listen,
I'm like, I need to see it.
I will answer to anything that's anywhere close to my name because it's a weird name. Let's be real. Lyndie is a weird name. So nice
unique.
To be here,
it's
Annie.
Not weird. It's unique and it's beautiful. It's just my brain and my spelling really jumbles words. But tell us who you are, where you live, and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'm Lyndie Laramore. I'm quite a few things. So I'll name the list. I am a therapist by trade. I have a private practice. I'm also a career coach. I do some consulting work, and I am someone who's diagnosed with ADHD myself, which is one of my specialties. So I really support folks navigating career changes and just life with ADHD, especially now that we're finding out so much more about what it is to be an adult with ADHD, a woman with ADHD, right? And then it looks a little different. I'm also a classical singer. And, in my free time, I like to be doing yoga or walking outside, going for a run. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. I always like to talk about, I think that we all face disruptions to different degrees and throughout different seasons in our life. And so when you think of the word just as a general definition of disruption or change or challenge, what comes to mind as a definition for you?
Yeah. I mean, so the word has several different meanings for me. I also do some lobbying work in the state of Massachusetts. So, when I think of disruption, I think of creating positive change, which can feel very disrupting on a larger level. Personally, however, I think of my past year. This past year was a very disrupted year. And so by that, I mean, my background in the behavioral health field has been in leadership and startups. So I have started clinics in the community. I've started partial hospitalization programs. And so there was this Lyndie version, this version of Lyndie that I was going to be the CEO one day, right? I was going to be running whatever company, I was going to be taken over. And so I think in that time, disruption meant, I think there's a very specific way to do things. I think that disruption meant radically creating spaces in the behavioral health field where folks could feel engaged, where both the people receiving services and the people providing services could feel safe and engaged. And then I was so, intent on making that happen that I forgot to check in with myself. And I ended up in the hospital for stress-related issues. I started doing this startup work in September of 2019. So you can imagine.
So you're really saying disruption in your general definition can be chosen or can happen to you. And you said you're kind of a go-getter. And so sometimes you're going into disruption, like saying, hey, I'm going to define things. I'm going to disrupt status quo. I'm going to make things better for myself and for other people. And so I always like to start with that. What is the general, how do you see it? Because we all see disruption differently. Some are afraid of it. Some are excited about it. People think it's necessary to have great change. So what I want to ask you next, Lyndie, is what is a personal or professional disruption, which it sounds like you're already going into that you have chosen or faced that you want to talk about and share with our listeners today, knowing that we always have people, and feel free to ask questions or leave comments. We love to hear who's watching, where you're from, and how we can best support you. So what is something personally or professionally you've gone through as a disruption?
Yeah. So in this last year, to your point, Annie, I do want to highlight and absolutely agree with you that for me, disruption was a word that I would choose and I felt was necessary, and didn't know that it also required an incredible amount to be a disruptor, which is a word that I've used to describe myself often.
Yeah.
Requires an incredible amount of self-care because you're choosing conflict, right? To choose disruption is to choose conflict. So the disruption that I didn't choose, we'll start with that one in the last year, was I can no longer be a leader in the way that I feel is important to me, right? I can be a leader that maybe does things in a way that gets things done, right? Checks off some boxes, but that's not who I am at my core. And so I left leadership. So I disrupted my entire career path and career goal. And I wanted to go into the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which isn't it interesting, the timing of how things work? I couldn't get a job. And so I had to really just ask myself, all right, what does this mean, right? Do I go back to doing the thing that didn't feel right for me? So I ended up choosing to start my own business. And the weird thing, Annie, was that felt like failure at that time. So,
Sorry.
right, folks often say that, like, what do you mean, because I had this idea of like, I want to be the CEO, or I want to be the head of DEI, or I want to continue to disrupt in the way that I think disruption should be, or create these spaces. And so doing my own thing, I felt like, well, this is just the thing that I'm going to do until I do the thing that I'm supposed to do, right? And I'm using quotation marks. So I was sharing with a friend the other day who's like, it's amazing that you own your own business. And it's like, yeah, but it was all because of failure, right?
Yes.
On paper.
Because of feeling like the things didn't work out exactly how we imagined. I'm not going to call it failure, because I think a lot of us end up pushed somewhere to start our own, and that's where we're supposed to be. Doesn't mean it's easy.
100%. And I talk about failure because oftentimes we will not choose the things that are better for us because we see them as failure, or we see them as not good enough, or we see us as not good enough for that thing, right? So it's almost like life has to happen to us in order for us to get to the place where we need to be. So I almost consciously use that word because I want to highlight that failure doesn't mean bad all the time. I don't know if that totally makes sense, but
then I want to repeat some things you said, because I always think like sound bites are great for our listeners. So you said, I choose disruption. I love that. And like my easy way, it's easy for me, not easy for my listeners always, is start with your closet. Disrupt your closet, get rid of the black and put some color in there, is a silly, simple disruption of like, what am I wearing? What am I choosing to wear? How am I choosing to show up? You also said, when I choose disruption, I'm choosing conflict, and that can be challenging. I think it's actually more than that. I think you're choosing, yes, to irritate, to create conflict, but also a sense of vulnerability. You're saying, hey, this matters enough that I'm willing to be vulnerable, even if I offend for it. But another thing you said, which I think is super important, Lyndie, super important for yourself and for our listeners, is in order to own our own business, be a disruptor, be vulnerable, we must have a self-care plan, and we must have boundaries around that, because self-care and boundaries keep us safe in the midst of conflict and vulnerability. And so I just think these are really important things. So what I want to think about is, okay, Lyndie, in your head, I'm going to say it's false, but it was a story you thought of and were listening to, is that you failed. Therefore, at finding the job as a CEO of a DEI position, that's not true story, but it was your story. And so you're creating the position that you dream of in your own business. So what I want to know, and what I want our listeners to be able to hear from you is, that's hard. It's hard, but true or false, if we're repeating, I'm a failure, it didn't work out, why doesn't anyone want me, whatever that story is. So how did you shift that story to stay hopeful? Oh my gosh, I feel overwhelmed, but I'm going to stay hopeful. What were some specific tools or strategies you did to keep moving forward in the midst of that hard? Because it's very vulnerable to believe in something so deeply that even if I don't get hired, I'm going to make it happen. And you
Yeah.
did. So
Yeah.
tell me, how did you stay hopeful in the midst of that?
First of all, I want to validate, I talk to folks all the time and I experience the same thing. We'll talk about the LinkedIn story, right? You know, like what if people see on my LinkedIn story that like, I didn't go up, I went sideways or down or, you know, and it can become a very real, we're not talking about LinkedIn, we're talking about identity, right? Like
Yes.
my identity is a leader. My identity is, you know, is a climber, or you know, people tell me I'm really good at this and that's who I am. So to your point, vulnerability, you know, often bumps up against identity. And so when I felt like I was failing at my identity, the thing I was supposed to do, then that, you know, that could be very difficult. So the way that I cope, I'm not going to say coped because it's a constant journey, right? I had this conversation last week.
Yes.
I had a moment of like, oh no, am I doing the right thing? It's first of all, it's making sure that you have a really carefully chosen tribe of people around you that can be kind of, you know, almost like your emergency contacts, but they're all for different things. Like when I'm feeling like a failure, I call this person. When I'm feeling overwhelmed by, you know, trying to figure out how to run a business, I call this person. So having that support group around you, people or that day where I'm like, I think I just suck at life, and then knowing that I can call this person and they'll be like, yeah, maybe this wasn't great, but also like, let's think of all the other things that you've done really well at. So boundaries, I think, are one of the most important things. My other specialty in the past has been, I've stepped away from it, but it's been trauma, PTSD. That was what I treated for a long time. And so with that, it's a lot of just boundaries work. And so for me, self-care is boundaries, and being very intentional with just my schedule, first of all, like not saying yes to every little thing, but then being intentional when I'm not fully scheduled. How am I using my time? How am I resting? How am I connecting with joy? How am I challenging myself in a way that feels healthy?
Yeah. One of my big specialties and one of the things I love, and listening to you, I'm like, oh, darling, this is not how I am hearing you, how you are saying you, because I think, oh my gosh, you started your own business. You are a CEO. You are brave.
Yes.
You are successful. Like
Yes.
You're extraordinary to do that. I love that you say you need a tribe for support. So for me, I think of my board of directors, and I coach people on speaking, and I say, you got to have someone when you get off the stage that you go, oh my gosh, I hit it out of the park. And you got to have someone that when you get off the stage and go, oh my gosh, I kind of screwed up. I don't think I said what I meant to say. All of those things. And the schedule, I was talking to another business owner the other day, and she was kind of saying, I feel like I'm failing. I'm not working enough. And I said, I've learned I'm most successful if I tell myself 10 to 2, Monday through Thursday, and 9 to 1 on Fridays is when I'm committed to work. As long as I'm in my office, if I'm traveling, it's different. But there's limits. We don't have to work, and we're never off. Like I wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm writing a book in my head. I wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm rewriting a speech that I'm going to give or that I've given, and how can I give it better? So I think you're very brave. I see you as a CEO, and I see you as successful. My employed friends that work for someone else, they'll say, I hate working 45 hours a week or 40 hours. And I'm like, when you are self-employed, it's like 90 hours a week. Like my brain does not turn off of all the things I could do. So what I want to know from you next, Lyndie, is, so you've started this business. It's vulnerable. It's like people see us when we're succeeding, but they have no idea all the no's we get, all the rejections, all the overlooked, all the expenses. So what I always think about is, how are you taking care of your health? You mentioned some, but I want to give you 7 words, and I want you to pick one or more than one that resonate with you. So physical, we always think of health physical. I used to own gyms, but to me, I always think there's so much more. Emotional health, mental health, financial health. Owning your own business can be very challenging. Career health, relationship health, and spiritual health. So I love that you said you have people, and I hope you literally know this is this person for this. So for our listeners, 1 or 2 people aren't everything. They can't be, nor should they be, nor can you be. But you need to have your people that you know. I mean, I have so many awesome friends that I know, call them on this one, call this one on this one, and exactly what you're identifying. So how did you stay healthy, and how do you stay healthy ongoing when you do feel overwhelmed? What area of health do you want to talk about, and how do you take care of that?
Yeah. So first of all, exercise is, we can't talk enough about exercise, right? Like and we do talk a lot about it because it is kind of the answer to everything, weirdly, right? So, but also, I'm someone in the past who used to just go all out. I mean, I have a black belt because that felt like a good idea one time. You know what I mean? Like you just
What can I achieve? Yes.
Right. Yes. And thinking less about achieve, less about what's I gotta be the best at everything, and more about the holistic picture of what do I need today? Do I need to stretch? Do I need to meditate? But I don't have time for both, so that's yoga, right? Do I need to be in nature? So that's a walk, that's a hike. Do I have a lot of energy and I need to get it out? That's maybe a run or a good bike ride, right? So for me, especially with ADHD, I need variety. I can't get bored. Yes. So yeah.
I get it.
Yes. So that's physical health, also eating well. That's non-optional these days. So I'm back in therapy because running a business is challenging, and it's a challenging time. I also see a prescriber for the first time in my life. Being diagnosed with ADHD later on in life means that you're thinking through a different lens very suddenly. So that's part of it. And I think for emotion,
I don't know what a prescriber is.
Medication. So medication.
Oh, someone that prescribes medication. Okay. I never heard
Yes.
that word before. Prescriber. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Therapy speech. I forget, sometimes we speak in a weird language. Yeah. So, but for emotional health, every day it's a little bit different. It's so hard to encompass, but one of the things that I did when I found out I had ADHD is I started to schedule time in my day for breakdowns. Or more in my week. I talk to folks a lot about some people call them like the horizontal days, or the days where it's like I get so overwhelmed I can't get up. And with ADHD, this is a thing, right? Sometimes depression, sometimes anxiety. I try to schedule time in my days for me to connect with my feelings and my emotions, whatever they are. So, or really in the week. So I have like a couple of hours that are just free, because if I'm experiencing overwhelming emotions somewhere in my week, they need time to come out. I also do burnout coaching. So this is part of dealing with burnout, is honoring the emotions and letting them do their thing. Yeah. Journaling can be really helpful as well. And I'm an extrovert, and I know this about myself, so I need to make sure I'm connecting with social obligations, even though they might feel like that sometimes. And I sing regularly in a choir, and I do some solo work, so that also helps.
Yeah, you do a lot of creative, but one thing that you said that really stands out to me, and I don't know if, like you said, we could talk about exercise forever, and that is true, but I think one thing that I remember when I was 26 and I was pregnant and saying to the doctor, my body is so loud right now. Like it's telling me, eat right, go to bed, do this. And he said, oh, your body's always talking. You just rarely listen. And you said, listen to my body. And I think it's so important is that our body, if we slow down for 5 minutes even and say, what do you need today? Do you need a nap? Do you need to go for a run? Do you need yoga? Do you need, like, our body will tell us. I always think movement is medicine, whatever form of movement. Music is medicine. Fresh air is medicine. So when you're saying we can't talk about it enough, it's so true. It's not, I want to exercise because I need to exercise because I need to lose weight. It is, I want to release the stress in my body. I want to get some of this energy out. I want to relax my body and take a nap. I love that you schedule time to check in and to acknowledge. I always say emotionally healthy people feel what they feel without aggression or apology. Because a lot of people are like, listen, I'm pissed at you. And I'm like, okay, can you communicate better? Or I'm so sorry, I'm sad. I'm sorry. No, don't be sorry. Just feel your feelings. So I love that you schedule that. I think it's so, so valuable and important. And I love that you said, listen to your body. It will tell you, I need to do nothing. I need to release energy. And if we are willing to listen, he just said, when you're pregnant, your body's louder. But he said, if we pay attention, our body always speaks to us. And I just thought that was such valuable. He was such a kind doctor. And I remember it was so emotional. And he was like, don't apologize. You're creating a miracle and we take it for granted. And your body's always talking and you're just hearing. And how about happiness? Where do you find, I always think hope, health, and happiness is kind of how I keep going. Where do you find happiness? Where do you sing it? I love that you sing. To me, singing is like the greatest joy. And I cannot sing, but I love to sing. So where do you find your happiness, your joy? What fills you bubbling?
Yeah, it's so funny. The timing of this is really interesting because I found out last week that I have this really great gig coming up. It's the first time in a little while, and it's really exciting. And I'm being very intentional and thoughtful about how I'm approaching it this time because it requires a lot of preparation and kind of a short amount of time. And I had the thought this morning, so the timing is interesting. I'm sitting with clients and I'm, being my therapist self, trying to be my best self. And I have Bach in the back of my head, just kind of like notes. And I'm like, Lyndie, this is not, this is not mindful. You're not giving your best self to either one of these things. So I think, I'm getting busy again. It was great when I first started my business. I had all the time in the world. I could do whatever I wanted, right? So part of accessing happiness and joy in the busy times is making sure that we're really just doing one thing at a time, and not overbooking ourselves. I think I'm so glad that I have all these opportunities. I had wonderful time with friends this past weekend, and I felt myself torn. Like I felt myself kind of like, oh, should I be practicing right now? Or, should I be going to bed early? Should I be talking this much? You get singers are very neurotic if you haven't figured this out. So I think one of the things that I am talking myself through this time, one of my biggest roles ever, I was about to go on stage for, I was, the lead in an opera for the first time. It was a big deal. My mantra, as I was walking on stage with another soprano, was none of this matters and nobody cares. It seems so self-defeating, but in that moment, those things are so important. Yes. And if I make any mistake, the world's going to end, So I think, to answer your question, in order to access joy, sometimes it's putting things in their proper place and doing things one at a time.
Yeah.
Right.
Having a perspective on what you're doing. What I want to ask you, Lyndie, is what would you have told yourself 20 years ago? What have you learned? I always feel like wisdom comes with age, right? And life has lots of ups and downs, but what do you wish you knew 20 years ago that you know now and you're able to have better boundaries or balance around it? What would you have told yourself 20 years ago?
Well, now I want to say none of it matters and nobody cares, but
that's kind of true. That's a great lesson. That's a brilliant lesson to me. Like, right? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so there's an aspect of the what other people think of you. And I think I needed to hear this even last year when I was making career decisions. What other people think of you, it's simply not as important as you think or as it feels right now. That's a piece of it. But also, I was going through old pictures just a couple of weeks ago and looking at myself. And, in therapy, we talk about taking care of our younger selves, and look at myself and being like, my goodness, like you were vibrant, you were beautiful, like you were healthy, you had everything, and you have everything, right? And I think on a very basic level, you are worthy, I think is what I needed to hear.
Beautiful. You are worthy. With anything or nothing, you are worthy, period. All right. What I'd love to hear from you, Lyndie, as we kind of wind down here is, do you have a success story of somebody you've worked with that you've really been able to see come from maybe a place of hopeless into hope, health, and happiness, and that you got to be along for that ride on the journey? Do you have a success story you'd be willing to share with us about working with a client or about an experience in your life where you went from really hopeless to hopeful?
Yeah. I think I'm thinking of something a little more recently. So I I do a lot of work with burnout, which I think, especially with ADHD, and, I think there's a lot of burnout that can happen. And we've been talking a lot about this failure theme, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my more recent success stories, and I'll have to keep it a little bit vague, so forgive me, but is working with women who are recognizing their value and worth, recognizing that it's being used in the support of others in a way that doesn't feel healthy for them. So say in a corporate setting where they are making someone look really amazing, really amazing, but they're not receiving the recognition that they need, or the whatever it is, the boundaries, the rest, whatever it is, they're not getting what they need. Yeah. And so being able to kind of go through a similar journey that I went through, that's like, so what if my LinkedIn story doesn't look the way that I wanted it to look, right?
Yeah.
So what if my colleagues are like, oh, I guess she didn't make it, which most don't ever think that. And being able, so that for me, the most exciting thing was to see someone say, I am worth the risk of, what if this doesn't work, but what if it is the most amazing thing I've ever done, and being able to take that risk and be vulnerable and feel worthy of that. Yeah.
I love that. And being that we're in International Women's Day week, I love that that's kind of your story that we're celebrating. I always love celebrating. It is like, just brings me so much joy when I work with a woman, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I've decided to like myself. I've decided to go for it, even though I'm scared, but I'm going to be protected and have your support. So I love that's a great closing. Lyndie, I think you gave us a lot of great tips today. You gave us a lot of great ideas. You also, one thing that you did is you recognize no matter how far we are in our own healing journey, it's a work in progress always. So I thank you for that. I would love to know, I know our listeners are going to want to connect with you, know more about you. What's the one best place for them to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so LyndieLaramore.com. It's my website that gives you an idea of all of the services that I provide. That's probably the best place to find me.
Excellent. And please feel free to share a link to your website, either on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or all three of them. We thank you to our listeners. We're always here to listen to your questions, comments, even just get a hello and tell us where you're listening from. We appreciate you. We come to you every Wednesday just to pour in encouragement and hope and health and happiness. Thank you so much, Lyndie, for being with me today. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.